All right, let's dive in. Looks like we're headed into the world of AI, drones, and those always mind-bending predictions of Philip K. Dick today.
Sounds like a fascinating combination.
It really is, and it's all thanks to you, actually. You sent over this lecture, Needle-Eyeification 1, right?
That's the one, delivered by David Hyde just a few days ago.
David Hyde, right, okay. And we've got some visuals lined up, too, just to bring everything to life. You mentioned being fascinated by complex topics, those aha moments, and, well, let's just say I think you're in for a real treat.
I have a feeling this might be right up your alley, especially if you're interested in seeing how science fiction, like PKD's work, is starting to play out in the real world, particularly on the battlefields of Ukraine.
It's kind of eerie how some of his visions are becoming reality, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Hyde really digs into those parallels in the lecture. He starts with that initial phase of the war in Ukraine. Back when everyone thought Russia's superior firepower would be the deciding factor.
Right, the expectation was a swift victory, but then...
Then those Turkish-made drones, TB2s, showed up, and suddenly those expensive Russian tanks, the T-90s, weren't so invincible anymore.
It really is a modern-day David versus Goliath story when you think about it, right? These multi-million-dollar tanks being taken out by, what, DIY drones with RPGs strapped to them?
Pretty much. Hyde describes these drones as a game changer, a real aha moment for everyone, especially those Russian tank commanders who thought they were untouchable.
I bet they had a pretty big aha moment when those first few tanks got blown up, that's for sure.
You said it. But here's the thing. That was just the beginning. Hyde points out how quickly drone technology is evolving, even in the short time since those initial attacks in Ukraine.
Faster, smarter, deadlier. Where does it end?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Hyde talks about longer ranges, faster speeds, and the emergence of what he calls drone swarms, hundreds of these things working together.
Okay, now that's where things start to get really interesting, but also a little creepy, right? We've got that image of 200 drones from those amazing drone shows, but imagine those things armed.
It's a pretty unsettling thought. Hyde actually describes these swarms as creating a brocade ellipse of destruction, which is both strangely beautiful and terrifying at the same time.
Brocade ellipse. It's almost poetic, but the reality is anything but.
Exactly, and it really gets to the heart of Hyde's lecture. Are we headed towards a future where wars are fought without soldiers on the ground? Where machines make life-or-death decisions with minimal human intervention?
It's a question that Philip K. Dick, the master of sci-fi himself, was grappling with decades ago, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Hyde specifically mentions PKD's short story Second Variety and its film adaptation, Screamers.
Now, for those who haven't had the pleasure of reading PKD or seeing Screamers, what are we dealing with here?
Both explore a future where autonomous killing machines have become so advanced that they've basically driven humanity underground. And the scariest part, these machines aren't just programmed to kill, they've evolved to the point where they can design and build even deadlier versions of themselves.
It's that whole idea of artificial intelligence becoming self-aware, right? And potentially turning against its creators.
Precisely. And then Hyde brings up this really unsettling question. Could these machines differentiate between humans and animals? Or would they just wipe out all life? It really makes you think about the ethics of AI, particularly in warfare.
Yeah, that's a conversation we definitely need to be having right now, not after it's too late.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about drones and AI and this whole idea of needle-eyeification, but I want to loop back to Philip K. Dick for a minute. How does his work, like beyond the technology itself, really speak to what we're seeing play out in the world today?
Well, Hyde actually uses one of PKD's lesser-known novels to illustrate this point. The Unteleported Man. It's a wild ride, let me tell you.
Okay. I'm vaguely familiar with that one. It's got something to do with teleportation, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the protagonist, Rakhmail Ben Applebaum, he's given the option to travel to this distant colony planet. But here's the catch. He can either take a spaceship, which will take years, or he can use this new instant teleportation system.
And being a good PKD protagonist, he's immediately suspicious.
Oh, absolutely. He smells a rat right away. Classic PKD paranoia.
But is it really paranoia if they're actually out to get you?
Touché. But anyway, Rakhmail chooses the slow route, the spaceship. He just can't shake this feeling that something's not right with the teleportation system.
And it turns out he's right to be suspicious, right?
Oh, yeah, big time. See, the teleportation is a one-way trip. No one ever comes back from this supposed utopia.
And Rakhmail wants to know why. What's the real agenda here? Who's controlling this technology and why?
Exactly. And that's what Hyde connects back to needle-eyeification. It's like, sure, the teleportation itself might be incredibly precise, targeted, but the implications, the control it represents, that's where things get really unsettling.
It's almost like a precision strike, but on an existential level.
Yeah.
You're not just eliminating a target, you're erasing their entire future.
Exactly. And PKD takes it even further. There's this scene where two characters are basically fighting over control of what's essentially an early version of the internet.
Wait, seriously, PKD was writing about internet warfare back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah, he was way ahead of his time. So one character launches this kind of psychic virus attack through this proto-internet, and the other character, to defend himself, uses a device PKD calls a detonation foil to neutralize the attack at its source.
So like a targeted cyber attack, but with a sci-fi twist?
Exactly, and that's what makes PKD so relevant today, even decades later. He had this uncanny ability to tap into these anxieties about technology, about control, about the potential for things to go very wrong.
And now here we are, facing those very real consequences. It's like he was writing a warning, and we didn't quite grasp the message until now.
It's definitely a case of life imitating art, or at least science fiction. And it raises some pretty big questions, like where do we go from here?
Right, because if this trend of needle-eyeification keeps accelerating, is that the future of warfare? Targeted assassination, cyber attacks, psychological manipulation. No more boots on the ground, just invisible, precise strikes. It's a chilling thought.
It is, and it's something Hyde grapples with in the lecture. He argues that traditional military strategies, like trying to hold territory, become almost impossible in this new era when you have drone swarms, long-range missiles, cyber attacks that can cripple infrastructure from anywhere in the world. The whole game changes.
And we're seeing hints of that in Ukraine already. Right, those Ukrainian drone strikes reaching all the way to Moscow, hitting targets that were once considered completely out of reach.
Exactly. It really drives home this point that no way is safe, that the lines between the front lines and the home front are blurring, and that has some very unsettling implications.
It definitely raises the stakes, and not just in terms of physical destruction. We're talking about psychological warfare, information warfare, the potential for manipulation and propaganda on a whole new level.
Absolutely, and that's something PKD understood all too well. Remember that scene in Second Variety where those soldiers realize the autonomous killing machines can't tell the difference between humans and animals?
Right, right. And it's not like those machines were programmed to be deliberately cruel. It's more like the lines just got blurred somewhere along the way.
Exactly, and that's the real danger of unchecked technological advancement, especially in warfare. We might think we're in control, but at what point do those lines get so blurry that we lose sight of our own humanity?
It's a question that feels like it's ripped straight from the pages of science fiction, but it's one we can't afford to ignore anymore.
It's very real, and it circles back to the power of PKD's work. He forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths, to question our assumptions about technology and progress.
So where does that leave us? What can we as individuals take away from all of this? Is there a call to action here?
I think the biggest takeaway is the need for informed and engaged dialogue. We can't just sit back and passively accept technological advancements without considering the potential consequences.
Right, like we were saying earlier, just because we can do something doesn't necessarily mean we should.
Exactly. We need to be asking those tough questions. What are the ethical implications of autonomous weapon systems? How do we ensure that these technologies are used responsibly? And what does it mean to be human in a world increasingly shaped by AI?
Those are big questions, and they're not going to be easy to answer.
They're not, but they're questions that PKD was already wrestling with decades ago. And his work can offer some valuable insights, even if they're not always comforting.
It's not just about the technology itself, right? It's about who controls it, what their intentions are, and how we, as a society, choose to engage with these advancements.
Precisely. It's about taking responsibility, both individually and collectively, for the future we're creating.
It's easy to get caught up in all the hardware, right? The drones, the weapons, the AI. But this goes way beyond gadgets and gizmos.
Absolutely.
To talk about the very nature of warfare, the future of conflict, maybe even what it means to be human in this rapidly changing world.
That's where PKD's genius really shines through, I think. He wasn't just writing about cool tech, he was holding up a mirror to society, forcing us to confront the potential consequences of our choices.
And some of those consequences are, well, pretty unsettling when you really think about them. Like Hyde talks about this idea of paraworlds in PKD's work.
Oh, right, those alternate realities that kind of bleed into the lives of his characters.
Exactly. And it's like PKD could foresee how technology, especially as it gets more advanced, could blur those lines between what's real and what's simulated.
It's like we're already halfway there, wouldn't you say?
With deepfakes, AI-generated content, the spread of misinformation online, it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real.
It's like that old saying, right? Seeing is no longer believing.
And when you start thinking about how this could play out in warfare, man, it gets kind of scary. Remember those drone swarms we were talking about? Imagine them being used not just for physical attacks, but for psychological warfare.
Projecting images, spreading propaganda, sowing confusion and chaos among the enemy.
Exactly. And with deepfakes, you wouldn't even know if what you were seeing was real or not.
You could have entire battles fought in the digital realm, the information space, with very real consequences for the losing side.
And how do you even begin to defend against that? It's like, where do you even draw the line between reality and simulation?
It's a whole new battleground, that's for sure. And it's one that PKD was already exploring decades ago.
It's almost like he was giving us a roadmap, warning us about the potential pitfalls of unchecked technological advancement.
Maybe you should have paid closer attention.
So, where do we go from here? Hyde ends his lecture with this really thought-provoking question. In an era of needle-eyeification, will the very nature of conflict fundamentally change?
It's a big question with no easy answers, but I think it's one we have to grapple with.
Because if the old rules of warfare no longer apply, if the lines between combatants and civilians continue to blur, if technology gives us the power to manipulate perceptions and wage war on a psychological level, where does it end?
That's the question, isn't it? And I think PKD's work offers some valuable insights, even if they're not always comforting.
What kind of insights?
Well, for one, PKD understood that technology is never neutral. It's always shaped by the values and intentions of those who create and wield it.
So it's not just about the tools themselves, it's about the hands that hold them.
Precisely. And even with the best of intentions, there's always the potential for unintended consequences.
Which brings us back to that need for caution, for thoughtful dialogue, for asking those tough ethical questions before we rush headlong into the future.
Exactly. We need to be mindful of the path we're on, and we need to be prepared to course correct if necessary.
Easier said than done, right? But I think that's a good note to end on. This has been a fascinating, if somewhat unsettling, deep dive into the world of Philip K. Dick, drone warfare, and the future of conflict.
It's certainly given us a lot to think about.
To say the least. We'll be back next week with another deep dive, so stay tuned for more.